Well, I can tell you there was certainly a lack of transparency from the former president, from the entire former administration, and frankly, a lot of people in this room when it came to the health and the competence of the former president of the United States, Joe Biden. There was one of the greatest cover-ups and frankly political scandals this nation has ever seen. It's been unraveled in some recent books that are being written by journalists who engaged in that cover-up and scandal, which is quite ironic. But this president is clearly committed to transparency. You in this room see him and hear from him on a daily basis. You in this room know from covering him, it's hard to keep up with him. He is a machine working around the clock every single day. And the physician, after today's physical, will provide an update on the report in the effort of transparency.
If I could ask.
Tonight, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt held a comprehensive press briefing addressing several critical issues facing the administration. The session covered topics ranging from immigration and trade to international relations and domestic policy initiatives. Below is a detailed report summarizing the key points discussed during the briefing. Immigration and Supreme Court ruling. One of the primary topics addressed was the Supreme Court unanimous decision requiring the administration to facilitate the return of Kilmer Abrego Garcia, who was wrongly deported by ICE. Leavitt emphasized the administration's interpretation of the ruling, stating that their responsibility is to facilitate, rather than effectuate, the return. This distinction suggests that while the administration acknowledges the court's decision, it may not take direct action to bring Garcia back to the United States. US-China trade relations. Leavitt addressed the ongoing trade tensions between the United States and China, highlighting recent developments and the administration's stance on tariffs and negotiations. She reiterated President Trump's commitment to securing favorable trade terms for the U.S. and emphasized that the administration is closely monitoring the situation to protect American economic interests. Domestic policy initiatives. The press secretary outlined new domestic policies aimed at boosting economic growth and addressing inflation concerns. Leavitt mentioned that the administration is implementing measures to stimulate the economy, including tax reforms and regulatory adjustments designed to encourage business investment and consumer confidence. International affairs. Leavitt provided updates on international matters, including the administration's position on global conflicts and diplomatic efforts. She discussed the upcoming visit of El Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele to the White House and addressed questions regarding the administration's expectations for the meeting. Additionally, Leavitt touched upon the situation in Gaza, expressing concern over reports of civilian casualties and emphasizing the need for thorough investigations to prevent similar incidents in the future. Stay tuned.
Stephen.
Thank you, Caroline. I'd like to ask you about presidential health and also about tariffs. On presidential health, are there plans for the president's physician to come here and take our questions? And also, President Trump repeatedly makes remarks about the former president's health. Is he considering using his executive powers to bring any greater transparency there?
As I have said, the president is undergoing his long-scheduled physical. It's a yearly physical that every president receives, and we will provide an update on that by the president's physician as soon as we possibly can.
And about the former president and transparency regarding his health, are there...
Sure. Thanks, Caroline. President Trump has said China wants to make a deal on tariffs. The president says he has a great relationship with Chinese President Xi. He's willing to speak with him directly. Why doesn't the president just pick up the phone and get this ball going?
All of the things the president just said are true. The president, as I said from the podium just a few days ago when I was up here, would be gracious if China intends to make a deal with the United States. If China continues to retaliate, it's not good for China. The United States of America is the strongest, best economy in the world, as evidenced by the more than 75 countries who have called the administration immediately to cut good deals. So the president wants to do what's right for the American people. He wants to see fair trade practices around the globe, and that's his intention and his goal.
So is he waiting for China to make the first move here?
I'm not going to comment on communications that are happening or may not be happening, or either way. We'll leave it to our national security team to get these discussions underway. And as always, in the effort of transparency, we will provide updates moving forward. But the president has made it very clear he's open to a deal with China.
Why is he optimistic that China's going to make a deal or wants to make a deal? If they're not talking, where's that optimism come from?
He's optimistic.
Hey,
Sean.
why would any of our allies work with us to isolate China in a trade war if we're treating friend and foe alike?
You'll have to talk to our allies who are reaching out to us. The phones are ringing off of the hooks. They've made it very clear they need the United States of America. They need our markets. They need our consumer base. You saw Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the Oval Office with the president saying that he was going to bring down all of their monetary tariffs and their non-monetary tariff trade barriers as well. We've heard from South Korea. We've heard from Japan. The president has spoken to Vietnam. We have Italy coming to the White House next week. There's a reason for that, Sean, and it's because they need the United States of America and our business model and our markets to survive, and the president is using that leverage to our advantage. Michael.
Hey, thank you, Caroline. Two-part question on China. Beijing says it will simply ignore any further tariff escalations from the U.S. Does President Trump see this as China backing down? And as a follow-up to that, what do you say to people like Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary who say, you guys simply haven't tariffed China enough?
Look, the tariff rate on China remains where it was yesterday, at the 145% level. The president made it very clear when the United States is punched, he will punch back harder. And he hopes to make a deal that benefits the American worker and our companies that have been ripped off for far too long. And he's finally taking bold and courageous action to do that. You know, taking on China is, in the terms of trade and tariffs, is something that both Democrats and Republicans alike have spoken about for decades. President Trump is finally doing it.
Caroline, real quick, the president of El Salvador is coming to the White House on Monday. Does President Trump want him to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia with him?
The Supreme Court made their ruling last night very clear that it's the administration's responsibility to facilitate the return, not to effectuate the return. I believe the Department of Justice just filed another brief in the lower court. I would defer you to that for any updates. But as you mentioned, President Bukele will be here at the White House on Monday to talk about the cooperation that is at an all-time high. And we very much appreciate President Bukele and El Salvador's cooperation and the repatriation of El Salvadorian gang members who the previous administration allowed to infiltrate our country. Sure.
Thank you very much, Caroline. The president spoke quite highly of the great relationship that he has with the Turkish president. We know that the president might be heading off to the Middle East very soon. Is he planning to meet with the Turkish president, either here in the White House or in Turkey? Any plans?
I don't have any details about the president's overseas trip other than to say he was surely going to Saudi Arabia. There could be more countries as part of that trip. We're working on the details, and as I've said repeatedly, we will provide the details of that trip as soon as possible.
A trip to Turkey, or his invitation to the Turkish president, is under consideration?
I am not going to comment on the details of the trip, but once they're confirmed, I will certainly let you all know. Yes.